The river got there before anything else did. Before the town, before the road, before the handful of men who decided this particular stretch of the Wyoming territory might be tamed if you drew enough lines on it and called them fences. The river was already there, moving slow and certain through the low ground. It didn't rush. It didn't boast. It just kept going, wearing its groove into the land with a patience the rest of the world never quite learned. On most days, it sounded like a long, quiet breath. The kind of man lets out when he's finally decided he's not getting anywhere else by standing up. Elias Brandt liked to listen to that sound. He sat his horse on the ridge above, a dark figure against the morning sky, and watched the water catch the early light. The sun hadn't fully cleared the distant hills yet. The world was still half-shadowed, half-waiting, as if it hadn't committed itself to being a day instead of a dream. Below him, the Brant spread stretched along both sides of the river, a broad quilt of pasture and brush and cottonwood, stitched together by wagon ruts and cattle trails. Barn roof catching the light, big ranch house sitting square and sure on a rise, corrals yawning empty for now. It looked, at first glance, like the kind of place a man might wish into his life if he were given one wish and had never owned enough to know better. Elias owned all of it. The papers in Cheyenne said as much. They said other things, too, that he'd come west with nothing and turned cattle and water into money as if he'd discovered a new kind of alchemy. That he'd made his first 1,000 driving trail herds and his first 100,000 buying out men who'd given up on the land too soon. That he was a rich cowboy now, whatever that meant, with more acres than he could ride in a week and more money than he knew what to do with. The papers never mentioned that he woke before dawn most mornings and rode out alone to listen to the river, because it was the only thing in the territory that didn't seem to want anything from him. The wind tugged at the brim of his hat. He adjusted it absently, his left shoulder giving a small, familiar protest. The bullet that lodged there 4 years back had been dug out clean enough, but the ache remained, a stubborn tenant in the bone. It complained when rain was coming, when he'd ridden too long, when he tried to swing his saddle without thinking about how he lifted his arm. Some days he thought of it as a debt collector, some days as a map, a reminder of where he'd been when everything had gone sideways. One trail drive gone ugly, an argument over stolen stock, a kid with shaky hands and a gun that went off before anyone meant it to. Elias had gone down in the dust and the noise, thinking very clearly that this was going to hurt his horse more than it hurt him. He'd lived. 3 others hadn't, including his younger brother. The land, the cattle, the money, that all came afterward, piled up on top of that one moment like dirt over a grave. His stallion, a rangy black with more opinions than sense, shifted under him, impatient. Elias let his gloved hand fall to the animal's neck, fingers spreading into the coarse mane, offering the small, steadying weight of something that knew where it was, even if the man on its back sometimes didn't. "Easy," he murmured. The horse snorted, as if agreeing to be easy only for now. Elias would ride down soon. Breakfast waited. Men waited. A day's worth of decisions waited, lined up like fence posts in his mind. Move that herd. Talk to the bank agent in town about the railroad's offer. Fire Johnson, or give him one more chance to show up sober. He should go. He didn't. Not yet. He stayed long enough to see the river shift fully into gold under the climbing sun, long enough to feel that familiar, hollow ache inside him settle into what passed for calm these days. Then he turned the stallion toward the slope and rode down. The ranch woke around him as he went. Doors opening, smoke rising from the cookhouse chimney, voices low and rough as men shook off sleep and reached for coffee and work. They tipped their hats when he passed, not obsequious, not exactly friendly. Respectful, wary, the way men were around someone who signed their pay and could take it away again with a single word. Elias answered each greeting with a nod. He spoke when he needed to. He listened more. He moved through the morning as he moved through most days now, like a man crossing a familiar river on stepping stones seen 100 times before, careful not to look too long at the water between. It was Ray, the foreman, older than Elias by 15 years and owed more trust than most men in his life, who told him about the stranger. Down by the bend, Ray said, scraping the last of his eggs from the plate in the cookhouse later that morning. Saw her from the North Bluff. Thought at first it was one of our boys washing up, but the dress gave her away. Elias's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Dress, he repeated. Ray shrugged, rough fabric creaking under the motion of his shoulders. Woman, he said, alone, sitting on the bank like she grew there. No horse I could see, no baggage, just her and the water. The other hands leaned in a little, smelling something like story. Women didn't often wander onto the Brant place uninvited. When they did, they usually came all the way up to the house and made sure somebody saw the dust on their skirts, the smallness of their shoes, the way the sun had worked its way into their eyes. Elias set his fork down. Could be trouble, one of the men said. Could be bait. You hear what happened over by Sweetwater? 3 fellas rode out to help a lady by the road. Ended up like 3 horses in their boots. She wasn't by the road, Ray said. She was by the water. Looked more lost than dangerous to me. He looked at Elias. When I should ride down and ask her business. For a heartbeat. The room went still with the unspoken expectation that the boss would say yes. That he'd keep his distance and send his man to handle whatever lay along the river, the way he handled most things now, with a measure word, a signed paper, a coin passed quietly across a desk. Instead, Elias heard his own voice say, no, I'll go. Ray's eyebrows climbed, but he only nodded. Yes, sir. The stallion didn't much care for being taken from his hay mid-morning, but Elias saddled him anyway. The air had warmed just enough to make the frost on the shaded grass release its grip and sink into the soil. The sky was a hard, clean blue, the kind that didn't offer much in the way of distraction. The path to the river bend was narrow, half suggested rather than drawn, following the line where sage gave way to sand and the willows leaned in close. Elias knew every turn of it. He'd ridden this way since he was 15, and his father had first decided maybe the boy wouldn't break if you put him on a horse, and pointed him at something bigger than himself. He slowed as he came within earshot of the water. The river's voice was louder here, where it twisted around a bend and narrowed. The current made a sound like someone talking just under their breath. Cottonwoods leaned over from the bank, their roots gripping the soil like fingers. Sunlight slipped between leaves and branches, breaking itself up into coins scattered on the surface. She was there. Ray had been right about the dress. She sat on the narrow strip of sand between water and brush, knees drawn up, arms wrapped around them. Her dress had once been some gentler color, blue, maybe, or gray, but dust and travel had rubbed the life out of it, left it something closer to the river stones. A shawl lay crooked over her shoulders. One of her boots was untied. Her hair was the first thing he really saw. It was pinned up in a way that suggested it had been done hastily or without much care for appearances. Dark brown, pulled back at the nape of her neck, a few strands escaping to curl against her cheek in the damp air off the water. She didn't turn when he rode up, didn't startle, didn't look at him at all. For a moment, Elias thought maybe she hadn't heard him. Then she said, without shifting her gaze from the slow-moving river, if you've come to tell me this is your land, I know it already. The Brant brands on every fence post between here and the horizon. Her voice was low, steady, with a tired edge that hadn't quite sharpened into bitterness. Elias reined the stallion in and swung down, favoring his bad shoulder out of habit. His boots sank a little into the damp sand. You're on my land, he said. But I didn't ride down to say it. She turned her head then, just enough for him to see her face full on. She was younger than he'd expected. Late 20s perhaps. Not a girl. Not yet worn fully into whatever kind of woman life was shaping her into. Her features were fine, almost too delicate for this country. Oval face, straight nose, mouth that looked like it had been made to smile often and had forgotten how. Her skin was pale under a thin wash of road dust, a faint scatter of freckles bridging her nose. Her eyes were what caught him, held him, gray-green, like storm light on water. Tired, yes. Haunted, maybe, but there was a stubborn brightness under the weariness, a small, hard ember that refused to go out. He realized, with a start that irritated him for its foolishness, that he had seen those eyes before. Not in any saloon or town or church pew. In dreams, half remembered on waking. In the empty spaces beside him at this very river, when he'd sat and imagined another presence there, not knowing the shape of it. It was a ridiculous thought. He kept it to himself. "You're trespassing," he said instead, because it was the thing a man in his position was supposed to say. She lifted her chin a fraction. "Then I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't figure I could offend the river much. It doesn't seem to care where it runs." He followed her gaze for a moment, watching the water slide past. "It doesn't," he agreed. A small silence settled between them. Not comfortable exactly. Not hostile. The kind that lay over two strangers who'd ended up in the same place for very different reasons. "You lost?" he asked. She let out a breath that could have been a laugh if there'd been more air in it. "Yes," she said, "but not in a way a map can fix." He glanced toward the line of track that led away toward the road. No horse, no wagon, no baggage besides a small valise sitting just beyond her boot. "You walking from town?" he asked. "I rode the stage as far as the crossing," she said. "Walk the rest." It seemed polite to approach on foot. "Polite," he repeated. "To something that doesn't know if it wants you," she said quietly. He studied her profile, the way her fingers tightened on the fabric at her knees, the way she kept her shoulders squared, as if bracing for a blow that hadn't come yet. "Miss," he prompted. "Clara," she said. "Clara Ellis. You're a long way from wherever you started, Miss Ellis." "Yes," she said. "I am." She sighed. "So are you." He frowned a little. "How'd you figure that?" "This place," she said, nodding toward the sweep of land behind him, toward the house just visible past the cottonwoods, "doesn't belong to a man who's just passing through. It belongs to somebody who's been running a long time and finally realized he was only moving in circles." He felt something in him go very still. "That's so?" he asked. She looked at him then, properly, as if measuring what she'd just said against his face. "It is," she said simply. "You know who I am?" he asked. "Elias Brandt," she said. "Richest man in these parts. Owns half the river and all the trouble that comes with it. At least, that's what they say in town. They say a lot of things in town." "Yes," she answered. "They do." He waited for the rest, for the accusation, the request, the angle question meant to slide under his guard. Instead, she went quiet again, turning back to the river as if it were the only thing that might answer something for her. He could have left it at that, could have told her to move along, pointed her back toward the road, washed his hands of whatever story had put that look on her face. He didn't. "What brings you to my water, Miss Ellis?" he asked. "Something that's not yours," she said. There was no heat in it, just observation. "I came to ask a question," she went on. "Didn't figure you were waking up in Cheyenne to answer letters from people like me, so I brought it to your doorstep." "Most folks go to the house when they want to ask me something," he said. She gave a small, crooked smile. "If I went to your house," she said, "somebody in a clean shirt would tell me you were busy, or not receiving visitors, or that I should put my request in writing and see about an appointment. Men like you have learned how to keep themselves from being smudged by people like me." She flicked a glance at his coat, his boots, the way his hat sat, just so on his head. "So I came to the place where the land doesn't care who I am," she finished. "Figured then, if you showed up, it'd be your choice." The honesty of it settled on him heavier than any accusation would have. "And your question?" he asked. She hesitated. Then, with a small exhale, she said, "How much does a life cost?" He went very still. "Whose?" he asked. "My father's," she said, "and my brother's. They were to claim up near Red Hollow until it swallowed them whole. Then it swallowed my mother. I'm the only piece of the Ellis family left walking around. Apparently, that makes me the one the debts fall on." Her hand tightened on her knees. "The bank says there's nothing to be done," she said, voice steady now in the way of someone repeating something she'd already argued with herself 100 times. "The company that ran the claim says my father should have known the risks. The town says it's a shame, and then it goes back to buying its bread and its lead and its ribbons." She turned to him again. "And they say," she added, "that if anybody could spare a piece of what he's got without feeling the ground shift under his feet, it's Elias Brandt." There it was. He'd been waiting for it, the part where she'd lay her need at his feet and ask him to step over it or into it. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" he said. "By the note," she said. On the claim. On the shack that sits over it. On the little patch of nothing around it. It's not worth much to anyone on paper. Wasn't worth much to us in the end. But it's the only place my family ever owned straight. The only ground they're in. I can't stand the thought of some man with a ledger coming and putting his boot where their names are scratched into the doorframe. Her eyes were too bright now. She blinked hard. You could buy it in an afternoon, she said. Probably lose the amount between your kitchen table and your pocket without noticing. I can't. I've got a valise, an address, and a mind that knows how to tally figures and scrub floors. That's all. Elias listened to the river while she spoke, to the slow, tireless sound of it. Why should I, he asked. She didn't flinch. Because you can, she said. Because they can't. Because somebody ought to care whether or not a lifetime's worth of hard work gets rolled into another man's inventory. He thought of his own father, hands cracked and bleeding from branding irons, standing in a dry pasture and saying, "We keep at it or we lose it. That's all there is." He thought of the way the land had taken his brother without asking his permission. He thought of how much his own house cost, how much the chandeliers alone had run him, back when he'd still believed that putting enough polished surfaces around himself might reflect back a man he wanted to be. "How much is the note for?" he asked. She told him. It was less than he guessed. He did the calculation without meaning to. The price of a dozen steers. The cost of a single bad card game in Cheyenne. A week's worth of feed. He could buy it 10 times over and not have to cross anything off his own ledger. The fact that he did not obligate him to. For a moment, he wanted to say no. To turn away from the weight of her gaze and her loss, and the way his own ghost stirred when she talked about ground-swallowing families. He could hear his lawyer's voice in his head. "You cannot save every failing parcel of land, Mr. Brandt. You are not some frontier saint. You're a businessman." He was tired of being a businessman. He looked at her, the way the wind tugged at a loose strand of hair, the way her jaw was set stubbornly even as her hand shook. "What if I bought it," he said slowly, "and put it in your name?" She blinked. "What?" "The note," he said. "The claim. The shack. All of it. Deeded to you. Clara Ellis." Her breath went short. "You'd give it to me?" "Not give," he said. "Call it trade." "For what?" she whispered. He surprised himself with his answer. "For your help," he said. "On this place. For a year." She stared. "You want me to work for you," she said. "Not in the house," he said quickly, hearing how it could sound. "Not like that. Out here. You said you know how to tally figures. I need somebody who can read contracts and not let a man from the railroad talk me into giving away more water than I mean to. You said you can scrub floors. I need somebody who's not afraid of hard, thankless work. I'll pay you a fair wage on top of it. Enough to keep you fed and clothed. At the end of a year, the land's yours clean." Her eyes searched his face, as if trying to find the trick in it. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do that?" He looked past her for a moment, toward the bend where the river vanished, then back. "Because I'm tired of buying things that only make me feel emptier," he said. "Because I've been dreaming of something different. Someone different. Walking into my life without asking for a stake in the company. Just asking me to stand somewhere human and decide whether or not I can help." He met her gaze. "Because I've been thinking," he went on, "that if I'm going to keep waking up on this land, I'd rather look around and see the ways I chose to make it kinder instead of just bigger." She held his eyes for a long time. "You don't even know me," she said softly. "Maybe I don't," he said. "But I know this. You walked to my river instead of to my lawyer. You asked me to save a place that's no good to anybody but you, and you asked it in a way that didn't beg and didn't threaten. That says something." His shoulder pulsed under his coat. He ignored it. "It's your choice," he added. "I can buy the note and hand it to you outright if you'd rather walk away from here owing me nothing but a thank you and your name on a piece of paper. Or you can stay. Help me. Let the work be something besides what buried your family." She looked back at the water. The river kept moving, unhurried. "I don't want charity," she said. "I'm not offering it," he answered. "I'm offering a bargain." She thought about that. He could see the struggle in every line of her. Pride doing battle with exhaustion. Grief wrestling with the faint, stubborn curve of hope she'd kept hidden under a shawl. Finally, she exhaled. "All right," she said. "A year." He nodded once. "A year," he agreed. She turned to him then, hand outstretched. Her palm was calloused, warmer than he expected. His own hand swallowed it, rough skin against rough skin, the grip of two people who had run out of softer ways to meet the world. Something shifted in him, deep and quiet. He'd shaken 1,000 hands in his life. Men who wanted land, cattle, water, money. Men who wanted pieces of him he'd learned to keep back. This was different. He didn't say that aloud. "Come up to the house," he said instead. "We'll get you settled." She bent to pick up her valise. It was lighter than a life ought to be. They walked up from the river side by side, not touching, not talking much. The stallion followed behind at an easy walk, as if he understood, in his own way, that something had just been altered on this land that wasn't measured in acres or head. Life on the Brant Ranch did not change all at once when Clara Ellis came. She took the spare room at the end of the hall, the one that had once been meant for guests and had never seen a soul. She sat at the long table in his study with contracts spread before her, lips moving quietly as she checked figures, pointed out clauses that bent the wrong way. In the evenings, she walked down to the river. Sometimes Elias saw her from the ridge, a small figure in a plain dress, hair pinned up, shawl drawn close. She'd been on his place a month before he allowed himself to ride down again. "You regretting your year yet?" he asked, dismounting a few yards from where she sat. She shook her head. "No," she said. "It's strange, waking up and having somewhere to be that isn't a boarding house kitchen or a stranger steps with a broom in my hand. The work here feels like it belongs to something." He lowered himself onto the sand, careful of his shoulder. "The land," he said. "Yes," she answered. "And you. And me a little now, I suppose." They sat listening to the water. "Do you think of them?" he asked quietly. "Your people." "Every day," she said. "Less like a knife now. More like a song I don't always catch all the words to." He nodded. "I think of my brother," he said. "More than I admit." "What was his name?" "Owen," she said at once, softly, like it deserved to be heard again. "Owen." After that, when she walked by his framed photograph on the mantel, smiling, younger than Elias had been when he died, she put a hand briefly to the wood, as if acknowledging an introduction. The months slipped past, stitched together by work and weather and small, quiet conversations. He learned that she loved the sound of thunder, but hated the sudden dark clouds that brought it. That she had been engaged once to a man back east who'd loved her ability to keep books, but not her unwillingness to keep quiet. That she braided her hair at night to keep it from tangling, and that she read the Bible not for its promises of heaven, but for the stories of people who had broken themselves on earth and somehow kept walking. She learned that his left shoulder ached when it rained, that he'd once been meaner than he was now and was still trying to make peace with the version of himself who'd thought other men's cattle were up for negotiation, that he wrote letters in longhand late at night, some to men he'd wronged, some to his dead brother, and burned more than he sent. They did not talk about love. Not at first. They talked about grass and calves and the way the snowmelt would come down too fast this year. One evening, toward the end of summer, when the light lay long and soft on the river and the cottonwoods were full and green, Clara stood at the water's edge with her shoes off, toes in the cool mud. Elias came down as he often did now. Led by habit and something gentler, he did not bother disguising from himself anymore. "You ever feel like you dreamed something before it happened?" she asked without preamble. He hesitated. "Sometimes," he said. "Why?" "I used to dream of a place," she said, eyes far away. "A house that didn't smell like fear. A man who didn't need me to be small so he could feel big. A stretch of water that sounded like it knew my name even if nobody else remembered it. I used to wake up and tell myself it wasn't for me. That girls like me got rooms over saloons and men who liked their whiskey more than their wives. And then I came here." She looked at him. "At you," she added, almost shyly, "and realized I'd seen you before. Not your face. Not exactly. But the way you stand. The way you look at the land like it might answer you if you wait long enough." His throat felt tight. "I used to dream of someone," he said, sitting right there. He nodded to the patch of sand she favored. Never could see her clear. Just knew she was there. Knew it felt less like I was waiting for something I didn't have the words for. He met her gaze. "When I rode down that first day and saw you by the river," he said, "I thought, well, there she is." Her lips parted. Elias, she whispered. He took a breath that felt deeper than any he'd taken in years. I don't know what the world thinks of me, he said. Or of you. I know what it says. It calls me rich and figures that means I've got nothing left to want. It looks at you and sees poor and orphan and problem. But when I sit at my own table and you're in the next room tallying my books, I feel more balanced. Like maybe the ground under my feet isn't just bought. It's earned. He stepped closer, slow. You came here to save a patch of earth for the dead, he said. Turns out, maybe you're saving something for the living too. She laughed once, wetly. You don't owe me pretty words, she said. They're not a debt, he answered. They're an observation. He took off his hat, held it against his chest. I would like, he said carefully, for you to stay. Past your year. Past the deed signing. Not just as the woman who keeps my ledgers clean. As the woman who sits beside my river. As the one who looks at me and doesn't see just what I own, but what I'm still trying to make right. He swallowed. As my wife, he finished. A soft breeze moved through the cottonwoods, setting the leaves to whispering. Clara stood very still. You don't know what I've done, she said, almost on reflex, as if the words were a shield she'd learned to raise whenever anything good stepped too close. He reached out, not quite touching her, his hand hovering near her cheek like he was afraid she might vanish if he did. I know enough, he said. I know you walk to a stranger's river instead of giving up. I know you carry your dead with tenderness, not excuses. I know you work hard when nobody's watching and harder when they are. I know you sit with my mother when her hands shake and pour her tea like she's royalty. I know you laugh now, sometimes when you forget you're not supposed to. His voice dropped. I know you've turned this house into something that feels less like a monument and more like a home. Her eyes shone. What if I say yes, she whispered, and the world says I'm not fit to stand next to you? That I bring bad luck. That wherever Clara Ellis goes, the ground caves in. He stepped that last little distance then, his hand finally finding her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. Let's talk, he said. The river knows better. So do I. She leaned into his touch just slightly. The land will be mine in a month, she said. It will be yours either way, he said. On paper. In truth. She smiled then, small and real. Then I suppose it's time I start thinking of this place as ours, she said. He let out a breath that felt like something breaking open. That mean yes? He asked. Yes, she said. The kiss, when it came, was not sudden or wild. It was careful, reverent. Two people who had lost too much learning how to hold something without squeezing the life out of it. Up on the ridge, a handwriting fence paused to watch the two small figures by the river come together and then turned his horse away, giving them that piece of the day. Time moved on. The deed to the Ellis claim was signed over in town, the land officially Clara's. She rode out to it once, alone, and came back with dust on her hem and peace in her eyes, saying only, they're staying where they are. The wedding was quiet. In the small church in the nearest town, with a handful of neighbors and ranch hands, and the preacher from Adobe Creek borrowing somebody's good Bible for the vows. No fancy gowns, no orchestra, just a woman in a simple dress, a man in his best, most honest clothes, and a congregation full of people who had watched them both travel their separate roads to this point. You come here with a past, the preacher said, voice steady. You leave here with a promise. Elias and Clara, you know better than most what can be taken in the space of a heartbeat. Guard what you're giving each other now, like it's water in a hard summer. I will, Elias said. So will I, Clara whispered. After, folks stood under the cottonwoods near the church, hats in their hands, watching the rich cowboy and the woman who'd once come to his river with nothing but a question and a valise walk out into the bright afternoon side by side. Some shook their heads. Some smiled. Some said nothing at all, letting the land and the sky and the slow, sure movement of the river be the only witnesses that mattered. Back on the Brant place, on their place now, the days didn't suddenly turn soft because they had spoken a few words in front of God and neighbors. Cows still broke fences. Storms still came too early or too late. The railroad still sent men with papers and sharp eyes. But there were 2 coffee cups on the porch railing in the mornings now, not one. 2 sets of boots by the door. 2 shadows moving through the house at night. crossing paths in the hall, pausing just long enough to touch a shoulder, a hand, a cheek. The hurt in Elias's shoulder never fully left. On cold mornings, Clara would rub liniment into it, her fingers firm and gentle at once. The hollow behind her eyes never disappeared completely, but sometimes sitting on the bank as the river moved past, she would lean her head against his shoulder and close her eyes, and he would feel something inside her loosen, like a knot being untied a strand at a time. He still rode out to the ridge most mornings. Now often, she rode with him. They'd sit their horses side by side, watching the light come up over the valley. The river would catch it first, as it always did, and spend it freely along its surface. "Think we did right?" he asked her once, after a hard week, when the accounts had looked mean and the sky had threatened early snow. She considered. "I think," she said slowly, "that if I'd turned away at your gate and you'd ridden past me at the river, we'd both still be alone right now, and the land would be poorer for it." He nodded. "So yes," she added, a smile in her voice. "I think we did right." He reached across the small space between their saddles and closed his hand around hers. The river moved on, tireless, carrying stones, shadows, reflections of clouds. It did not record contracts or banknotes. It did not care who was rich and who was poor. But if it remembered anything, in whatever way rivers remember, it would remember the morning a man who had thought himself finished with wanting found a woman beside its bend, and the quiet act of courage that followed, opening his gate when every hurt in him said, "Close it," offering a bargain that was part mercy, part hope, and all heart. A rich cowboy. A woman with nothing left but her name and the stubborn insistence that the places the dead had touched should not be erased. A river that had seen worse and better, and kept going. And somewhere along the way, without either of them quite noticing, the dreams they'd both written off as foolish had stepped out of the shadows, sat down on the sand beside them, and stayed.